The blistering sun hung like a vengeful eye over Dustwick County, Texas, as Daphne Davies wiped sweat from her brow and squinted at the amber waves of grain stretching before her. The year was 1875, and while most respectable ladies were fanning themselves on shaded porches, Daphne stood ankle-deep in golden wheat, her shoulders already burning from 2 hours of labor. "You don't have to keep at it, Miss Davies," called a deep voice that brought an unbidden flush to her cheeks. "No one would fault you for heading back to town." Daphne straightened her back, ignoring the protest of her muscles, and turned to face Finn Dalton. His tanned skin glistened with perspiration, wheat-colored hair curling damply at his temples beneath his worn Stetson. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled to the elbows, revealing corded forearms that spoke of years of hard work. "And leave you to harvest this entire field alone." She forced her voice to remain steady despite her racing heart. "I said I'd help, and I meant it. I'm not some delicate flower that wilts at the first sign of heat." Finn's eyes, blue as a cloudless Texas sky, studied her with a mixture of amusement and something else, something that made Daphne's stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with the midday heat. "Never said you were delicate," he replied, his voice low as he approached, scythe in hand. "Just don't want the new schoolteacher collapsing her first month in town. Folks would blame me." Daphne had arrived in Dustwick just 4 weeks prior, fresh from her teaching position in Philadelphia. When the drought had threatened the local harvest and every able body was called to help, she hadn't hesitated. Her father had raised her to believe that community meant something even if this dusty, unforgiving landscape was nothing like the civilization she'd left behind. "The children need their wheat bread more than they need grammar lessons," she said simply, reaching for her discarded scythe. "And I'm stronger than I look." A ghost of a smile crossed Finn's sun-weathered face. "That you are, Miss Davies." They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Daphne felt her chemise clinging to her back beneath her simple work dress, now stained with dust and sweat. She refused to complain, matching her rhythm to Finn's as they moved through the golden sea. "You've done this before," Finn observed during a brief water break, handing her the canteen from his saddlebag. Their fingers brushed, and Daphne almost dropped the container. "My father owned a small farm in Pennsylvania before he became a professor," she explained, careful not to drink too much too quickly. "He believed education should be practical as well as academic." "Smart man." He was. The past tense hung between them, and Finn nodded, understanding without her having to explain. As afternoon stretched into evening, more of the townsfolk who had been helping began to drift away, exhausted by the relentless sun. Finn's land was vast, too vast for one man, especially since his brother had left for California 2 years prior. Daphne had heard the whispers in town that Finn Dalton was too proud to sell, even though the work was killing him slowly. "You should rest," Finn said as the sun began its descent, painting the wheat in fiery hues. "You've done more than your share." Daphne shook her head, her once neat bun now a loose collection of chestnut tendrils framing her face. "We can get another hour in before dark. The rain's coming tomorrow, I can feel it in my bones." Finn looked at her strangely then, his eyes searching her face. "Most folk would have given up hours ago." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not most folk." "No," he agreed softly. "You're not." They worked until the last light faded, stars appearing like diamond dust scattered across the darkening sky. When they finally stopped, Daphne's arms trembled with exhaustion, her back a symphony of aches. Yet there was satisfaction in seeing how much they'd accomplished. "You'd better let me drive you back to town," Finn said, securing his tools on his wagon. "It's not safe for a lady to walk alone after dark." Daphne wanted to argue that she was perfectly capable, but practicality won out. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I would appreciate that." The wagon ride was quiet, the night air a blessed relief after the day's heat. Daphne was acutely aware of Finn beside her, his profile illuminated by moonlight. He was handsome in a rugged way that the men in Philadelphia had never been weathered by sun and hardship, eyes that had seen struggle but hadn't surrendered to it. "Why did you really come out to help today?" Finn asked suddenly. "Truth now." Daphne considered her answer carefully. "Because it needed doing. Because this town took me in when I had nowhere else to go." And because, she hesitated, Because I've spent too much of my life watching from windows instead of living in the world. Finn's hands tightened on the reins. That's a rare quality in a person. What is? Grit, he said simply. You've got more grit than the earth itself, Miss Davies. Something about the way he said it made her heart swell. Not a compliment on her appearance or her manners, as she'd received countless times before, but on her character, her strength. As if he truly saw her. Thank you, she whispered, and for once, didn't try to diminish the praise. When they reached the small boarding house where she had a room, Finn helped her down from the wagon, his hands firm but gentle on her waist. For a breathless moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Will you come tomorrow? He asked, voice rough. To finish the harvest before the rain? Yes, she answered without hesitation. I'll be there. He nodded once, then climbed back onto his wagon. Good night, Miss Davies. Daphne, she corrected impulsively. Please, call me Daphne. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it entirely. Good night, Daphne. I'm Finn. Good night, Finn. She watched him drive away, ignoring the knowing look from Mrs. Prescott, her landlady, who stood in the doorway. Tomorrow would bring another day of backbreaking labor, but Daphne found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation that had nothing to do with wheat and everything to do with the man who'd noticed her grit. Morning came with the promise of rain on the horizon, dark clouds gathering in the distance. Daphne dressed quickly in her sturdiest work clothes, braiding her hair tightly to keep it from her face. Her muscles protested every movement, but she ignored the discomfort. You're going out to the Dalton place again? Mrs. Prescott asked as Daphne hurried through breakfast. Talk will start, you know. Let it. Daphne replied, though her cheeks warmed. The wheat won't harvest itself, and the town needs the flour. Mrs. Prescott's expression softened. You're a good soul, Miss Davies. Just be careful with that heart of yours. Finn Dalton's been keeping to himself since his wife passed 5 years ago. Daphne's hand stilled over her coffee cup. I didn't know he was widowed. Influenza took her and their baby daughter in the same week, Mrs. Prescott said quietly. He's not been the same since. Throws himself into that land like he's trying to bury his grief in the soil. The revelation settled heavily in Daphne's chest. She'd lost both parents within a year, her mother to consumption, her father to a heart attack shortly after, but to lose a spouse and child together. She couldn't imagine such pain. Thank you for telling me, she said simply, and headed out the door. The clouds grew more threatening as she walked the 2 miles to Finn's farm, the air heavy with impending rain. She found him already in the fields, working with fierce determination, as if racing the weather itself. You came, he said when he spotted her, surprise evident in his voice. I said I would. She picked up an extra scythe he'd left propped against a fence post. We have until the storm breaks. Let's make it count. They worked with shared purpose, barely speaking except for necessary communication. Other townspeople arrived to help the blacksmith and his sons, several farmhands from neighboring properties, but none matched the steady pace that Daphne and Finn maintained. By midday, the sky had darkened ominously, and the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. The air crackled with electricity, and Daphne's skin prickled with awareness of the coming storm, of Finn's presence nearby, of something building between them that had nothing to do with weather. That's it, Finn called out eventually, standing tall to survey their work. We've got enough in. The rest will have to wait until after the rain. People began gathering their tools, hurrying toward wagons and horses. Daphne helped tie bundles of wheat, her fingers quick and practiced. When she straightened, she found Finn watching her. You should head back before the storm hits, he said. Daphne glanced at the sky. I don't think I'll make it to town in time. Stay, he said, then cleared his throat. At the house, I mean, until the storm passes. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the uncertainty in his eyes, a man and used to having guests, especially female ones. But practicality outweighed propriety. Thank you, she said simply. Finn's house was modest but well built, with solid walls that would withstand the coming tempest. Inside, it was sparse but clean, with few personal touches, a home maintained but not truly lived in. Daphne noticed the absence of feminine items, of family mementos. A house stripped of memories. I'll make some coffee, Finn said, moving toward the iron stove. You should rest. You've worked hard. So have you. Daphne countered, following him. Let me help. He looked like he wanted to refuse, but nodded instead. They moved around each other in the small kitchen, an unexpected domesticity taking shape between them. When their hands brushed as she passed him the coffee grounds, neither pulled away immediately. Rain began to lash against the windows, the storm arriving in earnest. Thunder shook the little house, and wind howled through the eaves. But inside, a different kind of tension was building, one made of shared glances and careful movements. "Why did you come to Dustwick?" Finn asked as they sat at his kitchen table, steaming cups before them. "It's not exactly a place people choose when they have options." Daphne's fingers traced the rim of her cup. "After my parents died, the school where my father taught offered me a position out of charity. I couldn't bear their pity. I saw the advertisement for a teacher here and thought a fresh start, somewhere no one knows me or my history." "Running away?" His question held no judgment. "Perhaps," she admitted. "Or running towards something. I'm not sure yet." She lifted her gaze to his. "And you?" Mrs. Prescott mentioned. She hesitated. "That I lost my family," he finished for her, his voice flat. "Yes. I'm sorry." Finn's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. "Catherine was born and raised here. She loved this land almost as much as I did. After she and Emma died." His voice caught. "Everyone said I should sell, start fresh somewhere else. But this soil holds their memory. I couldn't leave them." Daphne reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I understand." His fingers curled around hers, warm and calloused. "I think you do." They sat like that as the storm raged outside, two broken people finding unexpected comfort in shared grief. When Finn finally pulled his hand away, Daphne felt the loss acutely. "I should check the barn," he said, rising. "Make sure the roof's holding. I'll come with you." He raised an eyebrow. "It's pouring out there." Daphne smiled. "I'm already filthy from the fields. A little rain won't hurt." They dashed through the downpour to the barn, arriving soaked and breathless. Inside, the sturdy structure kept the worst of the storm at bay, though water dripped through in several places. Finn's two horses nickered at their entrance, and a trio of barn cats scattered to safer heights. "Looks like we've got a few leaks to patch," Finn said, pushing wet hair from his face. Daphne's dress clung to her like a second skin, her braid a sodden rope down her back. She should have felt uncomfortable, exposed, but instead found herself laughing, a genuine, spontaneous sound that seemed to surprise them both. "What's so funny?" Finn asked, his lips twitching. "If my finishing school headmistress could see me now," Daphne gasped between laughs. "Drenched in a barn with a man I barely know, after spending 2 days harvesting wheat. She'd have an apoplexy." A chuckle escaped Finn, then another, until he was laughing to a rusty sound, as if long and used. "You're not exactly the typical schoolteacher." "No," she agreed, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "I don't suppose I am." Their laughter faded, leaving a charged silence. They stood close enough that Daphne could see droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes, the pulse beating in his throat. Something shifted in his expression, a guardedness giving way to possibility. "Daphne," he said, her name a question in itself. She didn't know who moved first, only that suddenly his hands were framing her face, and her fingers were clutching his shirt, and then they were kissing as if the storm had somehow taken residence inside them. His lips were warm despite the rain-chilled air, tentative at first, then hungry when she responded with equal fervor. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" she whispered. "Because you deserve better than a broken-down farmer with nothing to offer but hard work and harder memories." Daphne pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "Let me decide what I deserve, Finn Dalton." Thunder cracked overhead, making them both jump, then smile sheepishly at their reaction. The moment of vulnerability had passed, though something fundamental had changed between them. "We should fix those leaks," Daphne said practically. They worked side by side, patching the worst spots with materials Finn had stored for such purposes. By the time they finished, the rain had softened to a steady patter, and evening had fallen. "The storm's easing," Finn observed, looking through the barn door at the darkened landscape. "But the roads will be mud. You'd best stay the night." Daphne knew she should protest for propriety's sake, but found she didn't want to. All right. Back at the house, Finn found her a clean shirt and trousers that had belonged to his younger brother. They'll be big, but dry, he said, carefully not looking at her as he handed over the clothes. You can change in there. He nodded toward a small bedroom. The room was clearly disused, dust covering surfaces, but the bed was made with clean linens. Daphne changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs of the borrowed clothes. When she emerged, Finn had changed as well and was building up the fire in the hearth. He glanced up, something softening in his expression at the sight of her in his brother's clothes. Hungry. Starving, she admitted. They prepared a simple meal together: beans, bacon, and cornbread that Finn had baked the previous day. As they ate, the easy conversation of two people discovering each other flowed naturally. Finn spoke of his childhood in Texas, of his dreams for his farm before life had taken unexpected turns. Daphne shared stories of Philadelphia, of her father's unorthodox educational methods, of her mother's music that had filled their home. You gave up a lot to come here, Finn observed. Daphne considered this. I left behind possessions and familiarity, but I was suffocating there, trapped in other people's expectations. Here, I can breathe, even with all this dust and heat. His smile was teasing. Especially with the dust and heat, she replied, completely serious. It feels real in a way my life there never did. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the room as the rain continued its gentle percussion on the roof. Daphne helped clear the dishes. Then Finn showed her to his brother's room where she'd be sleeping. I'll be just down the hall if you need anything, he said, hesitating at the doorway. Finn, she said softly, stopping him as he turned to leave. Thank you, not just for the shelter, but for seeing me the real me. His expression grew tender. Good night, Daphne. Good night. Sleep came surprisingly easily, the exhaustion of physical labor and emotional discovery pulling her under. She dreamed of wheat fields and blue eyes, of hands strong enough to work the land, yet gentle enough to wipe away tears. Morning broke clear and golden, the storm having washed the world clean. Daphne woke to the aroma of coffee and the distant sound of Finn moving about the kitchen. She dressed quickly in her now dry clothes from yesterday, smoothing her hair as best she could without proper implements. Finn looked up when she entered the kitchen, a flash of something warming his eyes before he nodded a greeting. Sleep well. Better than I expected, she admitted. The storm must have worn me out. The storm, he echoed with a small smile. Of course. They ate breakfast as sunlight streamed through the windows, neither mentioning the kiss they'd shared in the barn. Yet it hung between them, a tangible thing that had changed the very air they breathed. I should get back to town, Daphne said eventually. The children will be waiting for their lessons. Finn nodded. I'll drive you. The journey to town was filled with companionable silence, the landscape transformed by the rain-green shoots already reaching through the soggy earth, promising new life. When they reached the boarding house, several townspeople were already gathered outside, eyebrows raising at the sight of their schoolteacher returning from the Dalton farm in yesterday's clothes. Looks like we've given them something to talk about, Daphne murmured. Finn's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. I'm not, she replied firmly. Let them talk. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. When can I see you again? He asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. I have school until 3. After that, I'm free. A smile rare and beautiful transformed his face. I'll be waiting. For the next several weeks, a pattern emerged. Daphne taught during the day, then spent her evenings with Finn helping with farm chores, sharing meals, talking long into the night. Sometimes they rode across his land, Finn pointing out landmarks and sharing his dreams for the property. Other times, they simply sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The townsfolk gossiped, of course. The widowed farmer and the eastern schoolteacher made for irresistible speculation. But Daphne found she cared less with each passing day. This connection with Finn growing deeper, more essential, was worth whatever social price she might pay. Their physical relationship progressed with careful restraint. Kisses hello and goodbye, his hand at the small of her back. Her fingers intertwined with his as they walked. Each touch a promise, a question, an answer. Summer blazed on, the wheat harvest completed with the help of neighbors returning Finn's earlier assistance. The school term ended, giving Daphne more freedom with her days. She spent most of them at the farm, helping Finn with various projects, mending fences, tending the vegetable garden that had been Catherine's pride, learning the rhythms of ranch life. "You've changed things here," Finn said one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies illuminate the gathering dusk. "Before you came, this was just a place I worked. Now it feels like a home again." Daphne leaned her head against his shoulder. "Is that a good thing?" "The best thing," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life just existing. You made me want to live again." She turned her face up to his. "I love you, Finn Dalton." The words had been building within her for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Now they hung in the air between them, honest and irrevocable. Finn's breath caught. For a terrifying moment, Daphne thought she'd spoken too soon, crossed a boundary he wasn't ready to breach. Then his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close against his chest. "I love you too," he whispered against her temple. "God help me, I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. Didn't think I deserved to." "You deserve happiness," she said fiercely. "We both do." His kiss was tender, reverent, a sealing of promises not yet spoken. When they parted, his eyes held a question. "Stay," he said simply. "Not just tonight. Always." Daphne's heart soared. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Finn Dalton?" He smiled, suddenly boyish despite the lines that life had carved into his face. "I'm asking you to marry me, Daphne Davies. To build a life with me on this land. It won't be easy, the best things rarely are," she interrupted, cupping his face in her hands. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in Dustwick's small church, surrounded by townsfolk who had watched their relationship bloom with varying degrees of approval and skepticism. Daphne wore a simple cream dress ordered from a catalog, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Finn stood tall in his best suit, looking at her as if she were a miracle he couldn't quite believe. Finn, take you, Daphne, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Daphne repeated the vows, her voice didn't tremble. This wasn't a leap into the unknown, but a deliberate step toward the future she had chosen, one filled with hard work and simple joys, with a man who saw her strength as her most beautiful quality. Life as Mrs. Dalton brought challenges Daphne had never imagined in her Philadelphia existence. Summers scorched the land, winters froze fingers stiff, and spring tornadoes threatened everything they built. She continued teaching, riding to town on horseback each morning, determined to fulfill both her vocations, educator and farmer's wife. The following June, almost exactly a year after she'd first helped Finn with the harvest, Daphne found herself in the wheat fields again. This time, though, her movements were slowed by the gentle swell of her belly, their first child, due when the autumn leaves would turn. "You should be resting," Finn called, making his way toward her through the golden stalks. Daphne straightened, one hand pressed against her lower back. "And miss this? Not a chance." He reached her side, concern and admiration warring in his expression. "Stubborn woman. You knew that when you married me," she reminded him with a smile. Finn's hand covered hers where it rested on her stomach. "That I did. It was your grit that made me fall in love with you, remember? Out here in this very field. I remember. More grit than the earth itself, you said. Still true." He kissed her, tasting of sunshine and honest work. "But even the earth rests sometimes, Daphne." She laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Fine, I'll take a break. But only because your son is making me tired." "Daughter," Finn corrected with certainty. "She'll have your spirit and your brains. Either way, this child will know how to harvest wheat before they learn to read," Daphne promised, taking his arm as they walked toward the shade of a nearby oak. As they settled beneath the tree, Finn's hand never leaving hers, Daphne looked out across the land that had become her home. The wheat rippled like a golden ocean, the sky stretched endlessly blue above, and beside her sat the man who had taught her that sometimes the greatest adventures came disguised as simple days strung together with love and purpose. "Happy?" Finn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Daphne turned to him, seeing in his weathered face all their yesterdays and all their tomorrows. Completely. In October, their daughter was born as the first frost silvered the remaining wheat stalks. They named her Hope for what had brought them together, for what had sustained them through hardship, for what continued to grow between them with each passing season. And when Hope was old enough to toddle through the fields, her small hands reaching for the golden strands, Daphne and Finn taught her that the greatest harvest came not from the land itself, but from the love cultivated within it, a crop that, with proper tending, would sustain generations to come.